They say behind every great man is a great woman. But in Ethan James's case, behind him was the woman who owned the very ground he walked on, and he didn't even know it. He thought he was the CEO, the tycoon, the genius. He thought his quiet wife, Evelyn, was just a trophy gathering dust in their Hamptons estate. So he replaced her with a younger, hungrier model. He served Evelyn divorce papers, thinking he'd walk away with $500 million. He was wrong. When he signed those papers, he didn't just end a marriage. He triggered a clause in a blind trust that would erase his existence from the corporate world in less than 24 hours. This is the story of how a man chose his mistress over his wife, only to realize too late that his wife was the one holding the leash. Ethan James adjusted his cufflinks in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 45th floor of the Hudson Yards Tower. Below him, New York City looked like a circuit board, humming with energy he believed he controlled. He was the CEO of James Hart, a logistics and shipping conglomerate that moved everything from microchips to crude oil across the Atlantic. At 48, Ethan was the picture of American corporate royalty: silver fox hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. "Sir, the merger documents with the Omni Group are ready for review." His assistant, a terrified young man named Greg, stammered from the doorway. "Leave them," Ethan said, not turning around. "And cancel my dinner with Evelyn. Tell her the European markets are volatile. I'll be late." He wasn't going to be late. He was going to be with Jessica. Jessica Ford was 26, the new VP of marketing he'd personally headhunted from a boutique firm in Chicago. She was everything Evelyn wasn't: loud, ambitious, demanding, and visibly impressed by Ethan's power. Evelyn, his wife of 20 years, had become part of the furniture. She was soft-spoken, charitable, and maddeningly content with gardening at their estate in Greenwich. She never asked about the stock price. She never challenged him. She just poured tea and smiled that vague, gentle smile. Ethan hated it. He needed fire, and Jessica was an inferno. Later that evening, at a secluded table in Le Bernardin, Jessica swirled her Pinot Noir. "Are you going to do it, Ethan?" she asked, her voice low. "Or are we going to keep playing house while she picks out drapes for the summer home?" Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. "I spoke to the lawyers at Skadden today. The paperwork is drafted. We're in a community property state for the primary residence. But the prenup, it's old. 20 years old. My assets have grown tenfold since then. I'll give her the Greenwich house, a generous alimony, and send her on her way. She won't fight. Evelyn doesn't have the stomach for a fight." "And the company?" Jessica pressed, her eyes gleaming. "The company is mine," Ethan scoffed, taking a sip of his wine. "I built James Hart. Evelyn's father might have given me the seed capital back in the 90s, but I turned it into an empire. She has no board seat, no voting rights. She's a ghost, Jess. Soon, you'll be the one on my arm at the Met Gala." He truly believed it. He believed that the power he wielded came from his own brilliance. He had forgotten the nuances of the past. He had forgotten that when he married Evelyn, her father, the reclusive industrialist Arthur Hart, had insisted on a very specific, very complex trust structure. Ethan had signed the documents without reading the fine print, too eager to get his hands on the initial investment. He checked his Rolex. "I have to go back, just for a few more weeks. I need to keep appearances until the Omni merger closes. Once the stock spikes, I file the papers." Jessica pouted, but kissed him. "Don't take too long, Ethan. I'm not a woman who waits." Ethan arrived home at the Greenwich estate at 11:30 p.m. The house was dark, save for a single lamp in the library. He walked in to find Evelyn sitting in a leather armchair, a book in her lap. She was wearing a simple silk robe, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked older than Jessica, yes, but there was an elegance to her that Ethan had grown too blind to see. "You're late," she said softly. "Europe," Ethan lied smoothly, pouring himself a scotch. "The Omni deal is complicated. You wouldn't understand." Evelyn closed her book. It wasn't a novel. It was a bound report on maritime shipping regulations in the South China Sea. Ethan didn't notice. "I understand more than you think, Ethan," she said. "Did you eat?" "I grabbed something at the office." Another lie. He smelled of Le Bernardin's signature truffle sauce and Jessica's heavy Chanel perfume. "Ethan," Evelyn said, standing up. She was small, but she held herself with a peculiar stillness. "Is there something you want to tell me? You've been distant." Ethan looked at her, feeling a surge of pity mixed with contempt. She was so pathetic, he thought, so desperate to hold on to him. "I'm just tired, Evie," he sighed. "Go to bed. I have calls to make." He watched her walk up the grand staircase. He felt like a shark watching a seal. He had no idea that the seal was actually a leviathan, currently dormant, waiting for the water to be disturbed. The next morning, Ethan made a call to his private wealth manager at J.P. Morgan. "Move $2 million into the discrete account in the Caymans," Ethan ordered. "I want to buy a diamond, a big one, canary yellow." "For Mrs. Sinclair?" the banker asked. "No," Ethan said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "For the future Mrs. Sinclair." 3 weeks later, the Omni merger was finalized. James Hart's stock jumped 18% overnight. Ethan was personally worth $80 million more at 9:00 a.m. than he had been at 8:00 a.m. He was invincible. He decided to do it on a Friday. He wanted the weekend to move Jessica into the penthouse while Evelyn packed her bags in Greenwich. He instructed his driver to take him home early. When he arrived, the house was unusually active. Staff were moving about, polishing silver. Evelyn was in the conservatory, arranging white lilies. "Ethan?" she asked, surprised, wiping her hands on an apron. "You're home early. Is everything okay?" Ethan walked into the room, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. One was his personal attorney, a shark named Silas Vane. "Sit down, Evelyn," Ethan said. His voice was devoid of warmth. Evelyn looked at the men, then at Ethan. She untied her apron and sat on the edge of a wicker sofa. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She just folded her hands in her lap. "Who are these men?" she asked calmly. "This is Silas Vane. He represents me," Ethan said. He pulled a thick envelope from his inner jacket pocket and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I'm leaving you, Evelyn." The silence in the conservatory was deafening. A clock ticked on the wall. Outside, a gardener was mowing the lawn. "I see," Evelyn said. Her voice didn't crack. "Is it Jessica?" Ethan blinked. He hadn't realized she knew the name. "It doesn't matter who it is. What matters is that this marriage is over. We've grown apart. I need a partner who understands my world, Evelyn. Someone who can stand beside me at the top, not someone who hides in the garden." "I see," she repeated. "And the terms?" Silas Vane stepped forward. "Mr. Sinclair is being incredibly generous. You keep this house. You keep your jewelry. You will receive a lump sum of $5 million and a monthly stipend of $50,000 for the next 10 years. In exchange, you waive all claims to James Hart and its subsidiaries." Ethan puffed out his chest. "It's more than you'll ever need, Evie. You've never worked a day in your life. I've taken care of everything. Now I'm setting you free." Evelyn reached for the envelope. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. "And if I don't sign?" she asked, not looking up. Ethan laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Then we go to court, and I will crush you, Evie. I have the best lawyers in New York. I'll drag out the proceedings until you're bankrupt. I'll expose your father's old debts. I'll make sure you end up in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Don't make this ugly. Just sign." Evelyn looked up then. Her eyes were a striking shade of grey, usually soft, but now they looked like polished steel. "You really believe that, don't you?" she whispered. "You believe you built this?" "I did build this!" Ethan shouted, his patience snapping. "I took a failing shipping company and turned it into a global titan. Me, while you arranged flowers." Evelyn stood up. She walked over to a small antique desk in the corner of the room, picked up a pen, and returned to the table. "You want a divorce, Ethan?" she asked. "Yes." "You want full control of the company?" "It's already mine, but yes, I want it on paper." "And you want to marry Jessica Ford?" Ethan flinched. "Yes." Evelyn uncapped the pen. "Very well." She signed the document with a flourish. Evelyn Hart Sinclair. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward Silas Vane. "Done," she said. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by a surge of adrenaline. He had won. It was easier than he thought. "Good," Ethan said, straightening his tie. "You have until Monday to vacate the premises. I'll have the movers here at 8 a.m. "Actually," Evelyn said, checking her watch, "you should probably read the addendum on page 40, the one referencing the Hart Family Blind Trust and the primary shareholder clause." "Legal mumbo-jumbo," Ethan waved his hand. "Come on, Silas. We have a celebration dinner to get to." Ethan turned on his heel and marched out of the conservatory, feeling like a god. He didn't see Evelyn pick up her phone as soon as he left the room. She dialed a number. "Arthur," she said into the receiver. "It's done." He signed the separation agreement. He officially declared intent to dissolve the marriage. On the other end of the line, Arthur Pendleton, the 80-year-old executor of the Hart estate and the most feared corporate litigator of his generation, chuckled dryly. "Did he initiate it, Evelyn?" "That's the key. Did he serve you?" "He did. In front of witnesses." "Then the bad faith clause is triggered," Arthur said. "The assets revert. The proxies are withdrawn, effective immediately." Evelyn looked out the window as Ethan's Maybach sped down the driveway. "Execute Order 66, Arthur," she said, a rare, cold smile touching her lips. "Freeze his corporate cards. Lock him out of the server. And Arthur, call the board. Tell them the chairman has been relieved of his duties. The owner is returning." She hung up the phone and looked at the lilies. She snapped the head off one of them with a sharp crack. "I hope you enjoy the celebration, Ethan," she whispered to the empty room. "It's going to be your last." The celebration was set at the Vault, an exclusive members-only club in Tribeca, buried 3 stories underground inside a converted bank vault from the 1920s. The air smelled of aged leather, Cuban tobacco, and money. It was the kind of place where the menu had no prices because, if you had to ask, you didn't belong. Ethan James sat in a plush velvet booth, the dim amber lighting catching the crystal rim of his glass. Across from him, Jessica Ford was glowing. She wore a dress that cost more than the average American, made in 3 months. A shimmering silver slip that clung to her like a second skin. She was already scrolling through Zillow on her phone, looking at penthouses in Manhattan. "I'm thinking the Upper East Side is too stuffy," Jessica said, swiping a manicured finger across the screen. "Tribeca is better, or maybe a brownstone in the West Village, something with a rooftop garden. I can't deal with Evelyn's hydrangeas anymore. I want modern, Ethan." Stark, white, modern. Ethan swirled his vintage Dom Perignon, savouring the bubbles. He felt a profound sense of lightness. The anchor of his marriage had been cut loose. The heavy, silent judgment of Evelyn was gone. "Get whatever you want," Ethan said, his voice thick with the arrogance of a man who believed he had just pulled off the heist of the century. "The Omni deal bonus hits next week. That alone covers the down payment on anything in this city." "And the divorce?" Jessica asked, looking up from her phone, her eyes narrowing slightly. "She really just signed? No fight? No screaming?" "Evelyn is a woman of minimal substance," Ethan said, dismissing the memory of his wife with a wave of his hand. "She knows her place. She knows I'm the engine that keeps her lifestyle running. Fighting me would mean cutting off her own oxygen supply. She's practical, if nothing else." He signaled for the sommelier. "Another bottle, the 96 Bollinger, and bring the caviar service, the beluga." The hours blurred into a haze of self-congratulation. Ethan recounted the meeting with the Omni Group executives for the third time, embellishing his own ruthlessness with each retelling. Jessica feigned interest, but her eyes kept darting to the diamond ring Ethan had promised to buy her the next day. Around 1 a.m., the bill arrived. It came in a heavy leather folio, discreetly placed on the edge of the table. Ethan didn't even look at the total. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his Centurion card, the black titanium card that was the ultimate symbol of his status. He slid it into the folio with a practiced flick of his wrist. "Add 20% for yourself," he told the waiter, a young man named Pierre whom Ethan had known for years. "Thank you, Mr. James," Pierre said, bowing slightly before retreating to the payment terminal near the bar. Ethan leaned back, loosening his tie. "To us," he toasted, raising his glass. "To the future." Jessica clinked her glass against his. "To the future, Mrs. James." Minutes passed. The low hum of jazz filled the room. Ethan was tracing the line of Jessica's jaw with his thumb when he noticed Pierre returning. The waiter's usually impassive face was flushed. He held the leather folio with both hands, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. James," Pierre whispered, leaning in so as not to disturb the neighboring tables. "I apologize, sir. There seems to be an issue with the card." Ethan frowned, his hand freezing on Jessica's neck. "What kind of issue? The chip?" It was declined, sir," Pierre said, looking at the floor. "Code 05. Do not honor." Ethan laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous, Pierre. That card has no limit. Run it again, or type the numbers in manually." "I did, sir. 3 times. The system flagged it as lost or stolen." Jessica's smile faltered. "Ethan? What's going on?" "Nothing," Ethan snapped, his face heating up. "Bank error. Incompetence." He reached into his wallet and pulled out his platinum business card. "Use this one, and tell your manager to fix his machine before I buy this place and fire everyone." Pierre took the second card and hurried away. Ethan took a deep drink of his champagne, but it tasted sour now. "Ridiculous," he muttered. "Probably a security freeze because of the purchase I made earlier for the diamond." Jessica relaxed. "Oh, right. The diamond." 5 minutes later, the manager of the vault approached the table. He was a tall, severe man named Henri. He wasn't holding the folio. He was holding Ethan's cards. "Mr. James," Henri said, his voice icy and loud enough that the table next to them turned to look. "Both cards have been declined. We also attempted your personal debit card on file. Insufficient funds." The silence that fell over the table was heavy, suffocating. "That is impossible," Ethan hissed, standing up. He towered over the manager, using his height to intimidate. "I have over $4 million in liquid cash in that checking account alone. Run it again." "I cannot, sir," Henry said, his face impassive. "The terminal says, 'Refer to issuer. Confiscate card.' I am afraid I cannot return these to you." "You're stealing my cards?" Ethan roared. The jazz band seemed to stop playing. Every eye in the club was on him. "Ethan, sit down," Jessica hissed, grabbing his arm, her nails dug into his suit jacket. "Everyone is staring." Ethan ripped his arm away. He pulled out his phone. "I'll clear this up right now. I'm calling J.P. Morgan." He dialed his private banker's personal cell number. It rang once. Then, a mechanical voice he had never heard before spoke. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He frowned and dialed the main concierge line for high-net-worth clients. "Welcome to J.P. Morgan. Please enter your account number." Ethan punched in the digits he had memorized for a decade. "We are sorry. That account number is not recognized. If you are a new customer, please press 1. His hands began to tremble. A cold bead of sweat trickled down his spine. This wasn't a glitch. A glitch was a double charge. A glitch was a frozen screen. This was erasure. He looked up at Henry, who was waiting with his arms crossed. He looked at Jessica, whose expression had shifted from confusion to a look Ethan recognized from his own boardroom, calculating risk. "Do you have a card, Jessica?" Ethan asked, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. Jessica blinked. "Me? Ethan, this bill is $6,000. My limit is $500. The humiliation was a physical blow. It felt like a punch to the gut. Ethan James, the king of glass, the titan of logistics, had to leave his watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus worth $80,000, as collateral to cover a dinner check. He walked out of the vault into the cool night air of Tribeca, Jessica trailing a few feet behind him. The text messages started coming in then. Ping. Amex fraud alert. Corporate card terminated by administrator. Ping. James Hart. IT security. Remote access to device. Ethan's iPhone revoked. Data wipe initiating in 30 seconds. "Ethan," Jessica said, her voice sharp. "What the hell is happening? Why did my company email just bounce back?" Ethan stared at his phone as the screen went black. A white loading bar appeared. Erasing. He looked up at the streetlights, his mind racing, trying to find the logic, the enemy. And then, the memory of the morning rushed back to him. The conservatory, the white lilies, the document he hadn't read, the primary shareholder clause. "Evelyn," he whispered. The weekend was a purgatory of silence. Ethan's phone was a brick. His laptop was locked out. He couldn't access his bank accounts, his email, or even the security gate of the Greenwich estate, which, he found out when he tried to return to get fresh clothes, had been recoded. He had spent 2 nights at the St. Regis, forcing the concierge to bill it to the company account, praying the hotel hadn't been notified of his status yet. Monday morning arrived with the grey, heavy weight of a funeral. Ethan dressed in the same suit he had worn on Friday. It was wrinkled now, the crispness gone. He didn't care. He needed to get to the office. He needed to get into the building. Once he was in the C-suite, he could fix this. He could fire the IT director. He could scream at the legal department until they reversed whatever clerical error Evelyn had triggered. He took a taxi to Hudson Yards. He didn't have the cash for a private car. The glass tower of James Hart pierced the sky, a monument to his ego. He marched toward the revolving doors, his chin high, trying to project the power he no longer felt. He approached the security turnstiles. Usually, he didn't even have to scan. The guards would see him coming and buzz him through. Today, the head of security, a man named Miller, was standing in front of the gate. Miller was a former Marine, a man Ethan had hired personally. "Good morning, Miller," Ethan said, not breaking stride. Miller stepped into his path. He didn't smile. He didn't salute. "I can't let you up, Mr. James," Ethan stopped, stunned. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am?" "I do, sir," Miller said, his voice flat. "But your credentials have been revoked. I have orders to bar you from the premises." "Orders?" Ethan laughed, a manic edge creeping into his voice. "I give the orders. I am the CEO. I am the chairman of the board. Now move aside before I have you thrown out on the street." People were stopping to watch. Employees were whispering, holding their coffee cups, staring at the spectacle of their leader being denied entry like a fired intern. "Sir, please don't make a scene," Miller said quietly. "If you try to bypass the turnstile, I will have to detain you." Ethan's face turned purple. "Call legal. Call Silas Vane. Get him down here now." "Mr. Vane is upstairs," Miller said. "He is in the boardroom. They are expecting you, but I have to escort you. You are to be treated as a visitor. Visitor badge only." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. A visitor badge, a plastic clip-on tag. "Fine," Ethan spat. "Take me up." The elevator ride was silent. Miller stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Ethan stared at the floor numbers ticking up, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. 3, 44, 45. The doors slid open. The executive floor was quiet. Too quiet. Usually phones were ringing, assistants were running. Today the staff sat at their desks, heads down, typing furiously. No one looked up as he passed. It was the silence of a crew that knew the captain had been thrown overboard. Miller led him to the double mahogany doors of the boardroom. He opened one door and gestured for Ethan to enter. Ethan straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, and walked in. The room was full. The entire board of directors was there. Silas Vane, his own lawyer, was sitting at the far end, looking pale and refusing to meet Ethan's eyes. But it was the person at the head of the table who sucked the air out of Ethan's lungs. Evelyn was sitting in his chair. She wasn't wearing her gardening clothes. She was wearing a tailored navy suit with a high collar, her grey hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewellery except for a simple gold pin on her lapel, the crest of the Hart family. She looked small in the massive leather chair, yet she occupied the space with a terrifying gravity. To her right sat Arthur Pendleton, the octogenarian lawyer, looking like a vulture who had just spotted a fresh carcass. "You're in my seat," Ethan said. It was a weak opening, and he knew it. "Sit down, Ethan," Evelyn said. Her voice was not the soft murmur he was used to. It was projected, clear and resonant. It was the voice of a woman who had been listening to quarterly earnings calls for 20 years while pouring tea. Ethan remained standing. "What is this, Evelyn? Some kind of joke? Freezing my accounts? Locking me out? You're going to jail for corporate sabotage." "Read the bylaws, Ethan," Arthur Pendleton croaked, tapping a thick, leather-bound book on the table. "Specifically the Hart Family Trust, Section 4, Paragraph 2. "I don't care about your father's trust," Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I built this company. When I took over, stock was at $10. Now it's at $200. I did that." "Me." "You managed the company, Ethan," Evelyn corrected him gently. "You didn't build it. My father built it. My grandfather built it. You were a steward." She picked up a single sheet of paper. "When you married me," she continued, her eyes locking onto his, "my father was concerned about your ambition. He admired it, but he didn't trust it. So he structured the shares differently. You were given Class B operational shares. They hold voting rights only as long as you are a member of the family in good standing." The room was deadly silent. Ethan looked at Silas Vane. "Is this true?" Silas nodded miserably. "I checked the original incorporation papers this morning, Ethan. I never looked at the 98 amendment because you told me you owned 51% outright." "I do." "No," Evelyn said. "You own 51% of the Class B stock, but the Class A preferred stock, the stock that holds veto power, the stock that controls the board, the stock that actually owns the assets, is held by the Hart Trust." She leaned forward. "And the trust has a trigger clause. In the event of a filed separation initiated by the non-blood spouse against the blood heir, all Class B shares revert to the trust immediately upon signature." Ethan felt his knees give way. He slumped into the nearest chair. "You signed the divorce papers, Ethan," Evelyn said, her voice devoid of pity. "You initiated the separation. In doing so, you effectively resigned. You don't own 51% of this company. You don't own 1%. You don't even own the chair you're sitting in." Ethan looked around the room. The board members, men and women he had golfed with, dined with, enriched, were all looking at Evelyn. They knew where the power lay. They were survivors. "But the merger," Ethan stammered. "The Omni deal. I'm the only one who understands the logistics." "Actually," Evelyn said, glancing at a file in front of her, "I've been reviewing the Omni deal. It's sloppy. You're over-leveraging our European distribution network to pay for short-term stock gains. It's a vanity project. I'm cancelling it." "You can't!" Ethan screamed. "The market will crash." "The market respects stability," Arthur Pendleton interjected. "And Mrs. Hart Sinclair has just been appointed interim CEO by a unanimous vote of the Class A shareholders, which is to say herself." Evelyn stood up. She walked around the table until she was standing next to Ethan. He smelled the faint scent of lilies and steel. "You wanted a partner who understood your world, Ethan," she said softly, echoing his words from the conservatory. "I understood it better than you ever did. I let you play king because it made you happy, but you broke the one rule my father gave you: never bet against the house." She turned to Miller, who was standing by the door. "Please escort Mr. James out of the building. He has personal effects in his office. A few photos, a golf trophy. Let him take a box. But check it before he leaves. No laptops, no files." "Evelyn, please," Ethan whispered, the reality finally crushing him. "Don't do this. I'll fire Jessica. I'll tear up the papers. We can go back." Evelyn looked down at him. For a second, he saw a flicker of the woman who had loved him for 20 years. But then he saw the woman he had betrayed. "Go back?" she asked. "Ethan, the movers are at the Greenwich house right now. But they aren't packing my things. They're packing yours." She turned her back on him and walked toward the window, looking out over the city she now commanded. "Get him out of my sight." The walk from the elevator bank to the revolving doors of the James Hart Tower was the longest journey of Ethan James's life. He carried a standard-issue banker's box containing a framed photo of himself golfing with a senator, a brass putter, and a stress ball. That was the sum total of 20 years of executive dominance. It was raining in Hudson Yards, a cold, grey drizzle that slicked the pavement. Ethan stood on the curb, the box rapidly getting soggy. He instinctively raised his hand to hail a cab, then remembered he had no cash and no active credit cards. He lowered his hand, feeling the water seep into the shoulder of his Brioni suit. He had to get to Jessica. She was the only lifeline left. She was smart. She had her own savings, surely. They could regroup. He still had his contacts. He could start a consulting firm. He was Ethan James, damn it. People would pay for his brain, even if he didn't have the capital. He walked 40 blocks uptown to the St. Regis, where he had booked a suite for them under the company account. His Italian leather loafers blistered his feet. When he arrived at the hotel, he was dripping wet and out of breath. He marched to the front desk, ignoring the wary look of the concierge. "Key for suite 1402, Ethan demanded. "I lost mine." The concierge, a man who had bowed to Ethan for a decade, typed into his terminal. He frowned. "Mr. James," the concierge said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm afraid that room has been locked out. We were contacted by the credit card issuer an hour ago. Fraud alert. We've been instructed to hold all luggage until the outstanding balance of $12,000 is settled." Ethan gripped the marble counter. "My fiancée is in that room. Ms. Ford." "Call her down." "Ms. Ford checked out 20 minutes ago, sir. She settled her personal incidental charges with her own card and left." Ethan felt the room spin. "Left? Where did she go?" "I believe she asked the doorman for a car to JFK, sir." Ethan turned and ran. He ran out of the hotel, ignoring the doorman, and sprinted toward the subway entrance. He jumped the turnstile, risking arrest, and caught an E-train toward the airport. He didn't know which terminal. He didn't know which flight. He just knew he had to stop her. He didn't make it to JFK. He made it to the platform at 53rd and Lexington before the adrenaline crashed. He sat on a grime-encrusted bench, surrounded by the screech of metal wheels and the smell of stale ozone. He borrowed a phone from a teenager by offering him his gold cufflinks. The kid looked at the cufflinks, bit one to check the metal, and handed over a cracked iPhone. Ethan dialed Jessica's number. It rang. Once. Twice. "Hello?" Her voice was crisp, composed, background noise of an airport announcement. "Jessica!" Ethan gasped. "It's me. Where are you? The hotel said you left." "Ethan?" She sighed, the sound of a woman who had just realized she stepped in something unpleasant. "I'm going back to Chicago. My old firm offered to take me back if I start Monday." "Chicago?" "Baby, listen to me. It's a misunderstanding. Evelyn pulled a legal stunt. I'm going to fix it. I just need a few days. Don't leave me. We're a team." There was a pause on the line. A long, cold silence. "A team?" Jessica laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Ethan, look at yourself. You're 50 years old. You're broke. You're blacklisted. I checked Bloomberg while I was packing. The news is already out. James ousted. Heiress reclaims throne. You're radioactive." "I did this for you," Ethan screamed, causing commuters to step away from him. "I blew up my life for you." "You blew up your life because you're a narcissist, Ethan," Jessica said calmly. "I was just the excuse. And frankly, you were interesting because you were powerful. Without the jet, without the black card, without the CEO title, you're just a soured, older man going through a midlife crisis. And I don't do charity." "I love you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You love the way I look at you," she corrected. "Goodbye, Ethan. Don't call me. I'm changing my number when I land." The line went dead. Ethan handed the phone back to the teenager. He sat on the bench, head in his hands. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the engagement ring box, the empty box. He had never picked up the diamond. The wire transfer hadn't gone through. He had nothing. No wife, no mistress, no home, no money. That night, Ethan James, the man who had shaped the logistics of the North Atlantic, slept in a 24-hour laundromat in Queens because it was warm and nobody asked him to leave. While Ethan was shivering on a plastic chair in Queens, Evelyn Hart Sinclair was sitting in the frantic quiet of the James Hart CEO's office. It was 2 a.m. on Tuesday. The room looked different. She had already removed the modern abstract art Ethan favored and replaced it with the old maritime oil paintings her father had loved. The chrome desk was covered in stacks of paper. Across from her sat Arthur Pendleton and a team of 3 forensic accountants from Deloitte. They had been working for 16 hours straight. "It's worse than we thought, Evelyn," Arthur said, rubbing his tired eyes. He pushed a ledger across the desk. Evelyn put on her reading glasses. "Show me." He wasn't just spending his salary, the lead accountant, a sharp woman named Sarah, explained. He was funneling operational capital into shell vendors. Look here, J-Force marketing consultants. They've been billing us $50,000 a month for brand strategy for the last 2 years. Who owns J-Force? Evelyn asked, though she already suspected the answer. Registered agent is Jessica Ford, Sarah said. The payments were approved by Ethan personally, bypassing the CFO. Evelyn felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, but she pushed it down. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was business. That's embezzlement, Evelyn said softly. That's criminal. It is, Arthur nodded. We can file charges. The district attorney would drool over this. CEO looting company coffers to fund Mistress. It's a tabloid dream. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were a blur of gold and white. She thought about Ethan. She thought about the 20 years they had spent together. The way he used to look at her before the money rotted him from the inside out. She turned back to the room. No. Arthur blinked. No. Evelyn, he stole over $1 million. If we file criminal charges, the stock tanks, Evelyn said, her voice steady. The headlines will be about corruption, instability, scandal. Our partners in Europe will get nervous. The Omni Group, who we need to let down gently, will use it to sue us for breach of contract. She tapped her finger on the desk. We handle this the hard way, quietly, lethally. So he walks away scot-free? Sarah asked, outraged. Oh, he won't be free, Evelyn said, a dark smile touching her lips. Draft a civil suit, a repayment demand. Itemize every single cent. The dinners, the flights, the marketing fees, the hotel suites. Calculate the interest, and serve it to him. He can't pay it, Arthur noted. He's destitute. I know, Evelyn said, which means he will be in debt to the estate for the rest of his life. Any job he gets, we garnish his wages. Any asset he acquires, we place a lien on it. He won't go to prison, Arthur. Prison is too easy. He'll live in the open world, but he'll be a prisoner of his own debt. He will never own anything again. 3 days later, Ethan found a cheap lawyer, a guy named Saul who operated out of a strip mall in Jersey City and smelled of menthol cigarettes. You're screwed, buddy, Saul said, tossing the file onto his cluttered desk. Ethan sat in the squeaky chair, wearing a tracksuit he had bought at a thrift store. There has to be a loophole. The prenup. The prenup is ironclad, Saul said. But that's not your problem. The problem is this. He held up the civil demand letter Evelyn's team had sent to Ethan's last known email address. They want $1.4 million back, Saul whistled. Embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. If you fight this in court, they'll depose the mistress. They'll air all the dirty laundry, and then they'll refer it to the FBI. Ethan paled. So what do I do? You fold, Saul said. You sign the admission of liability. You agree to the payment plan, and you pray they don't press charges. Payment plan? Ethan asked weakly. Yeah, 10% of your gross income until the debt is paid. Plus interest. Ethan did the math in his head. At his age, with his reputation destroyed, he wouldn't be getting another CEO job. He'd be lucky to get a mid-level sales role. He would be paying Evelyn back until he died. He walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. He passed a newsstand. On the cover of Forbes was a face he knew better than his own. It was Evelyn. She was standing on the bow of a container ship, wind in her hair, looking fierce and regal. The headline read, "The Silent Partner Speaks, How Evelyn Hart Saved Her Empire from Ruin." Ethan stared at the magazine. He reached into his pocket to buy it, but found only lint and 2 quarters. It cost $5. He couldn't even afford to read about his own failure. He turned away, pulling his hood up, and disappeared into the crowd of anonymous faces, just another man who had reached for the sun and forgotten that his wings were made of wax. 12 months later, the winter in New Jersey felt colder than Ethan remembered. Perhaps the weather hadn't changed, but his insulation against it had. Gone were the cashmere overcoats and the heated leather seats of the Maybach. Now, there was only a thin polyester windbreaker and the drafty interior of a used Honda Civic. Ethan parked the car in the employee lot of Red Hook Logistics, a mid-tier trucking depot in Newark. It was 5:30 a.m. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, dark and unforgiving. He punched his time card. The sound, car-chunk, was the rhythm of his new life. "Morning, Rick." The depot manager, a 25-year-old kid named Jason, mumbled, barely looking up from his clipboard. "Good morning, Jason," Ethan replied, his voice devoid of its old, booming authority. Here, he wasn't Ethan James, the titan of the Atlantic. He was just Rick, the shift supervisor, who knew a surprisingly large amount about international shipping manifests, but owed so much money to creditors that he brought a ham sandwich from home every day. His job was to oversee the loading of crates. It was a cruel irony. He used to own the ships. Now he couldn't even afford the cargo inside them. Every 2 weeks, his paycheck was deposited, and immediately 40% was siphoned off by the court order, the Restitution for Corporate Malfeasance fund managed by the Hart estate. He walked the floor, checking invoices. His back ached. His hands, once manicured and soft, were rough and dry. At 10 a.m., a buzz went through the warehouse. The workers stopped loading. They gathered around the break-room television, a small, dusty screen mounted on the wall. "Hey, Rick, come check this out," one of the forklift drivers called out. "Isn't this the company you used to work for?" Ethan froze. He walked slowly toward the break room. On the screen, a breaking news banner flashed. "James Hart unveils the Evelyn, world's first carbon-neutral cargo vessel." The camera panned to the dry dock in Hamburg, Germany. There was a massive crowd, a sea of photographers, and a bottle of champagne swinging on a rope. And there she was. Evelyn stood on the podium. She looked breathtaking. She wasn't just well-dressed, she was luminous. She wore a white coat that stood out against the grey steel of the ship. Her hair was loose, blowing in the wind, and her smile was genuine. A smile Ethan realized he hadn't seen in the last decade of their marriage, because he had been the one suppressing it. She leaned into the microphone. "This ship represents a new era," Evelyn's voice came through the tinny speakers of the warehouse TV. "For too long, this industry was driven by greed and short-term gains. We built this not just for profit, but for legacy. To the team who stood by me when we purged the rot from the company, I thank you." The rot. Ethan felt the eyes of the warehouse workers on him. They didn't know he was the Ethan James. They just knew he was an old guy who talked about the good old days. But Ethan felt the sting of her words as if she had slapped him across the face. "She's a shark," the forklift driver whistled admiringly. "I heard she took over after her husband tried to run the place into the ground. Guy was a total fraud." Ethan swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered. "A total fraud." He turned away from the screen and walked back out to the loading dock. He couldn't watch the champagne bottle smash against the hull. He couldn't watch the symbol of her victory and his erasure. He stepped outside for fresh air. The Newark shipping channel was visible in the distance. A massive container ship was slowly making its way out to sea. It was one of theirs, one of hers, the blue and gold chimney stack of James Hart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had Jessica's number saved, though he never called it anymore. He had looked her up once, months ago. She was married now to a hedge fund manager in Chicago. She was pregnant. She had moved on as easily as she changed handbags. He was the only one stuck in the amber of the past. A black limousine pulled up to the gate of the Red Hook logistics yard. Ethan frowned. Limos didn't come here. The window rolled down. A face he recognized peered out. It was Silas Vane, his former lawyer. Silas looked older, tired. Ethan walked over to the fence. "Silas, what are you doing here?" Silas looked at Ethan, taking in the cheap jacket, the grey stubble, the weariness in his eyes. He didn't mock him, he just looked sad. "I have papers for you, Ethan," Silas said, handing a manila envelope through the chain-link fence. "More lawsuits?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "I have nothing left, Silas. She took it all." "No," Silas said softly. "It's a release." Ethan opened the envelope. It was a single document. Notice of debt forgiveness. "She's cancelling the remaining debt," Silas explained. "The remaining $800,000. It's wiped clean. You're free, Ethan." Ethan stared at the paper. The ink blurred as his eyes filled with tears. He should have felt relief. He should have felt joy. But instead, he felt a crushing, final hollowness. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Why now?" "It's her birthday today," Silas said. "She told me she wanted to clear out all the old business. She said—" Silas hesitated. "Said what, Silas?" "She said she doesn't want to carry the weight of you anymore. As long as you owed her money, you were still attached to her. She wants to cut the final string." Ethan gripped the fence. The kindness was the ultimate cruelty. She wasn't forgiving the debt out of mercy. She was forgiving it out of indifference. She had grown so large, and he had become so small, that punishing him was no longer worth her energy. He wasn't an enemy anymore. He was a nuisance to be filed away. "Tell her," Ethan started, then stopped. What could he tell her? "I'm sorry. It was too little. I love you. It was too late. I was wrong?" She already knew. "Tell her nothing," Ethan said, looking down at his worn-out shoes. Silas nodded, rolled up the window, and the limousine drove away, kicking up dust that settled on Ethan's jacket. Ethan stood there for a long time. The wind bit through his clothes. He looked at the document in his hand. His freedom. He was free to go, free to start over at 51, free to be nobody. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "Hey, Rick!" Jason shouted from the bay door. "Break's over. Truck on Bay 4 needs signing." Ethan looked at the horizon, where the James Hart ship was just a speck against the grey sky. He straightened his back, wiped his face with his sleeve, and turned around. "Coming!" he called back. He walked back into the warehouse, into the noise and the dust, leaving the ghost of Ethan James outside in the cold, finally dead, while the man named Rick went back to work. In the end, Ethan James learned the hardest lesson of all. True power is never loud. He mistook his wife's silence for weakness and her patience for submission, failing to realize that while he was playing the role of the king, she was the one who owned the kingdom. He chased the illusion of youth and excitement, only to find himself discarded by the very world he thought he controlled. Evelyn didn't just win, she transcended him. She showed that dignity and intelligence are the ultimate weapons against arrogance. Ethan walked away with his freedom, but he left behind his legacy, proving that you should never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand holds the pen to the trust fund. This story is a brutal reminder that the grass isn't always greener. Sometimes it's artificial turf waiting to be ripped out from under you. What do you think? Did Evelyn let him off too easy by forgiving the debt, or was cutting him off completely the ultimate revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.